Okay. If I could, I would love. So I saw that two places. One, you mentioned that you grew up in Vancouver, right? And the origin story was a little bit complicated. So we'd love to start there, and we'd love to let you introduce yourself. Tell us a bit more about the early life.
Sure. So my name is Jamie. My middle name is Nami, which was given to me by my grandfather. My last name is Kim, which is the most Korean last name you could find. Nami is nice because Nami is also a name you can use in Japanese. And that's important in my story because I mean, the way that I explain to people, I'm Korean, but I'm also Japanese.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm also Japanese is that, well, I mean, there's a historical context in that Korea was annexed by Japan.
Mm,
The not so glorious part of our family history is that my great uncle on my father's side was a collaborator with the Japanese. So when the war was over, he had to flee before they captured him for being a
wow.
collaborator. And there's this really crazy story that my dad told me quite recently, where so his father was the younger brother of this great uncle, and so great uncle left. Korea was, very poor. Many people were starving at that
Mm,
time, and so when our great uncle went there, he said, "Hey, there's a better life that could be had in Japan," as many Koreans did in that period. And so my grandfather fled also with his children, my dad, his brother and sister. I believe his sister was already born at that time, and they fled in the middle of the night. And
wow.
there's this story. He says there's this story. He doesn't know if it's true because his dad would often embellish stories to make them more interesting. But that he was being carried by his father, and his father, my grandfather, was carrying a sword and waving the sword as they were running towards the boat. And they ran to the boat, they got in the boat, and then, the boat went to Japan. This was just after the Second War. So my father's family essentially had to Japanize themselves.
Yeah.
Um, Again, as many Koreans did, but of course, you could be identified very easily to be Korean. But my family, because they had some privilege because of my great uncle, they were able to integrate more
Mm-hmm.
secretly. But
Yeah.
they also had to move a lot while they were there because, and this is another story, is because Koreans are very, let's just say, like very connected to their food.
Right.
And so my grandmother was still making kimchi,
Mm-hmm.
and then the story goes is that people could smell it. And our last name there is Nakamura.
Mm,
And they say, oh, the Nakamuras must be Korean.
mm.
And so then that they would have to leave again and try to find a new place where they could pretend to be Japanese. So we are very, with my family on my dad's side, we all speak in Japanese. I went to
Got it.
Japanese school. Um, my father, I think, I mean, I'm sure he has his own way of explaining it, but he has like a kind of a trifecta in identity. He is, I
Mm-hmm.
think, I think he is Japanese first. I don't know if he would say that. He
Yeah.
is Korean second, and he's Canadian third.
Mm.
Mine probably works in reverse, where I'm Canadian first, Korean second, and Japanese third.
It's interesting you flip the order, like Korean second, Japanese third. How does that come about?
Um, I think it's a bit of a choice, to be honest, and this is
Mm.
probably a little bit more comes to fruition as I came to fruition as I became an adult. I only went to Japanese school as like my second school outside of regular school. I never went to Korean school. So definitely I speak Japanese far better than Korean.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I feel more Korean. I think when I think about drawing from my ancestors, I'm really drawing from my Korean ancestors. Like I really draw from what it must have took
Yeah.
for um, my father's side of the family to make the decisions that they did. And I also think about the Koreans in Japan, and just in some ways you have to become Japanese. Probably on the inside, you're also still even more connected to your Koreanness.
Right. And
Um,
and what are they specifically? Like when you talk about, is it more about the food you eat, the culture you identify with?
I mean, it's hard for me to say because I'm not that, right? Because
Yeah.
I am Canadian first. I think a lot of it has to do with food. I think Koreans are very different from Japanese people.
Mm.
Um, I think I talk about Koreans being the Latin people of Asia.
The
They're just
Latin, yeah.
yeah, they're just a little bit more fiery,
Yeah.
right? And there's something that can't be extinguished. Koreans, of course, have been oppressed people many times over. So that is also very different from
Mm.
being colonizers as the Japanese have been.
Right.
So, there are things there that I think I have inherited unknowingly. Like I'm not totally conscious to these things.
Hmm.
But I think it has fed into something that has been true of me, which is I've always just had this interest um, to go for the underdog. Like if I'm watching sports,
Yeah.
even though I have like a favorite team, I might have a favorite team. Like I'm still
Hmm.
rooting for the team that's like expected to lose.
Right. And is that support, is that routine a fight against the authority, or is it more about you have compassion for the underdog, you want to let them seen as well?
It's definitely the latter. I don't have like a fighting kind of energy. I have
Mm.
more of the empathetic, compassionate energy. I have like a bleeding heart, I think.
Yeah.
That's the thing I feel like I've inherited for sure, that
Yeah.
bleeding heart. And so it feels like it has to bleed for something.
And tell me more about the bleeding heart. How has that manifested in your life?
I have like a very early memory of when that first happened. I think I was in grade 4 or 5. There was this girl that everybody picked on. She had very popular cousins.
Mm-hmm.
Their Greek family. Her cousins were like sort of the starlets of the school, and she was kind of considered the ugly duckling.
Mm.
And I remember sometimes she would walk down the hall. It was so awful. Kids can be so mean. Everybody would push their backs up against the wall to avoid her. And I remember in my class that the teacher decided to put the desk together as pairs,
Yeah.
and you kind of like had an opportunity to choose, and something happened, and I remember his name was Mr. Haas. Mr. Haas said, "And Jamie, you're going to sit with Helen."
Mm.
And everyone was like, "Oh," just like being again so terrible.
Yeah.
I had this moment where I was like, I'm going to help her.
Yeah.
This sucks.
Yeah. You're going to help Helen.
I'm going to sit with her and I'm going to become her friend. Screw them. And so that's one of my earliest memories of like having this moment of making that choice and having clarity about that. And then there have just been other moments. I think like I didn't know. It's not like I knew that that's what I was trying to do, right?
Yeah.
But I've had other subsequent moments where not necessarily underdog, but more people who are suffering. An earthquake that resulted in a kind of typhoon in Thailand. That must have
Thailand.
been early 2000s. I think that's when it happened. And I
Mm.
remember putting together like a fundraiser at
Mm-hmm.
work and trying to, and this is when I was working, started to get into like the creative industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought, well, here we are. This was in Toronto, living with all this nice stuff, privilege. What are we doing for these people?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I did a fundraiser, and that ended up becoming something where I felt like I was proving something to myself. When that first one happened, I think I've never really identified this as a turning point. I
Mm-hmm.
thought, oh, okay, this is actually not very hard. And this is nice. People feel good when stuff like this happens.
Yeah.
And so I kept doing stuff like that. My career is an unconventional story, but at some point I was very much immersed in the commercial world of advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I was definitely enjoying it, like being in a creative atmosphere, making things with people, traveling, doing things that haven't been done before. Like those are all wonderful, when you're a young person, that's really cool and
Yeah.
interesting and energizing. But there was always a part of me that felt like something about this is not enough.
Mm. Something about the life that people like, the glamorous life, wasn't enough.
Yeah, something about and what I was doing how it felt for me. It was really, I wasn't really judging what other people were doing. It just didn't feel like enough to me.
Yeah.
So the bleeding heart thing probably comes back here as I did another event, which was, I always recognize this as a major turning point, is when I was on the board of directors of a nonprofit organization based in Mozambique called ASEM. And, you know, it was nice. I was on the board of directors. I thought I was being helpful, but it was just all kind of like not tangible in any way. And I thought, well, what is this? What am I doing? So I thought, well, I have all this access to incredibly talented people, not only in the agency where I was working, but all the people that we could hire very easily, working artists. And I thought, well, what if I engage them and we did like an art show? And I called it Imagining Mozambique. And it was a show with, I think, probably almost 20 artists from all around the world. And they were given a brief and they knew what this was for. And I had this show in Amsterdam. This is when I was living there. And it just ended up being really, really successful. Again, kind of surprising. I wanted to do it. I wanted to, you know, fulfill on something, using your words, of manifest this energy in a way. And then when I noticed what the reaction was, and of course I was raising money, so, you know, you could buy the artwork. What, you know, why don't I just do more of this stuff? And then Haiti happened. Again, I was still in Amsterdam at that time. And it was, again, well, you know, what are we doing? We're just this global community. This is a thing that's happening very far away, but what are we doing? And so it was another event that I decided to put together. And this time I collaborated with some friends. You know, it was something that we put together in a week. And again, it had a lot of impact, not only in, you know, some financial sense. We were working with Habitat for Humanity, and, you know, we were able to build, I think, 7 houses with the money that we raised, which was great. But really just like also the community building that happened as a result of coming together, celebrating art, celebrating generosity, knowing that whatever it is that we were doing here was going to be helpful to somebody else.
It's fascinating how each of those fundraisers were really fast. It's almost like as if, let me know if that's wrong, but when you had that idea and the moment when you start to work on it, it's like in a week, right? Or how do you take the first step? Maybe it was back to the very first fundraiser you did, but, or maybe it's later, but were there any hesitations? Do you have to rally anyone, convince anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I love that you noticed that. That's not something I've ever noticed before. It was always very fast. I think there was, because this is for something that has nothing to do with me.
Yeah,
right.
lack of ego.
Yeah, this has something to do with supporting clearly people who need it. I don't think that there was anything for me to convince, right? It was always very easy for me to get sponsorship. I was a producer for many years, so I just knew how to get shit done, right? And so when I'm good at getting shit done, the story is very compelling. People want to be helpful. People are generally good, I believe. And so, but they just need to be presented opportunities where they can also manifest their goodness. And so I think I just presented it in the right moment, like kind of in the heat of the moment, right?
So it's almost, I mean, this is a beautiful exchange where you have this platform, all the expertise, and they have a way to engage in the beautiful art, either the art show or the fundraiser you are putting together for the world. So, wow. Is that your first foray into the creative industry, or did you do something before that?
Yeah, I did something very different. It's a funny story because I was so the story is going to seem scattered, but so I grew up in Canada. I got a scholarship in my last year of university here at UBC that allowed me to go and study in this sort of experimental program in Tokyo. And there is when I had real exposure to other people. I mean, we'd been traveling as a family every year to Japan. And maybe we'd do other like little trips, but I'd never been to Europe. I'd never been exposed to people from it's like Turkey or Egypt, this is very different places from me, but we were all studying in the same program. And I really felt like I was with the world in Tokyo.
Yeah.
Um, when that was over, it just felt like I couldn't go back to Vancouver at that point.
Mm.
And I really wanted to see what is the life that will allow me to keep being with the world.
Yeah.
And at that time, so this is around 2000, you have the internet.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, I want to do something that matters. And so I just started going on job boards of, and
Love it.
NGOs, NPOs, like what does the UN look for? Like literally trying to find a job
Yeah.
with the UN. And then, it just kept coming up, information technology, information technology. I was like, okay, that's like maybe the medium. And then I had saved up a lot of money while I was being in Tokyo, strangely enough, because everything was scholarship, but I was also doing a lot of translation work.
Mm.
I thought, well, I've made all these wonderful friends in Europe. I want to go visit all of them. And like I studied European history. I wanted to go, and I did that. I ended up falling in love with Italy,
Yeah.
which is also, a central point in the Mediterranean. And in Rome, Italy is actually where two of the main UN offices are based.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the Food Agricultural Organization and the World Food Program.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, okay, so maybe if I live in Rome, maybe if I live in ancient Rome, I will study information architecture or information technology, and I will eventually work in the UN. That was my thinking.
Yeah.
And I went and I did that. I convinced my parents that was the path. I studied, I studied HTML. I studied CSS. I just studied like very rudimentary
In Rome.
in
In
Rome, in
Rome.
the
Yeah.
most unconventional place to do such a thing.
Wow.
And then it's while I was actually studying Dreamweaver that I went to the professor at the end and I said, I really want to do something with what I have. And I'm also an
Mm.
English speaker, right? So what's possible here? And he introduced me to somebody who was working at, these are companies that were once called new media companies that service
Mm-hmm.
the United Nations. I was like, perfect.
Yeah.
So I was doing that for a few years. And then while I was there, I ended up eventually actually working for the UN directly. I left the
Mm-hmm.
new media company and I became what's called a civil servant.
Mm-hmm.
And it was by far the most boring job I've ever had in my life. by far,
Yeah.
it
So
was
what
ridiculous.
attracted you to the UN?
Well, just because I thought that isn't that for me, it was the archetype
Got
of
it.
doing international aid work.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's totally administrative, bureaucratic,
Right.
slow, extremely, extremely slow.
Mm.
So while I was there, and this is where the curveball happens, I actually decided to start a gelato company. This is going to sound ridiculous, but I decided the gelato company would happen in South Korea. There was no real Italian gelato in
That's
South Korea
smart.
at
Global
that time.
positioning. Yeah.
This was with a family member who was based in Seoul. And then, cutting that long story short is it eventually didn't happen. And that came down to dynamics of relationship.
Mm.
This is probably the first time I faced like a tangible experience of sexism. Which was a blessing and a curse, right? Because I was really hoping that would happen. But the blessing there was that whole experience of creation. I was coming up with the identity, the name. I was getting inspired looking at motion graphics at that time.
Mhm.
I was like, wow, there's so many cool things that you can do kind of on screen.
Yeah.
Um, and also, animation, just thinking about how all those things can have continuity with the real world and all
Mm.
that stuff was like really interesting to me. And even coming up with like products of what kind of gelato there would be and how that
Mhm.
would be represented. And so I was just really kind of enjoying, well, really bathing in that creativity. So when that didn't happen, I just decided to kind of merge that thing called information technology and creativity and started to try and find the path towards that. And that's when the relationship dynamic started to reveal itself. And that's when it ended.
I
And so I
see.
was unexpectedly back in Vancouver. And
Right.
I'm
Right.
like, oh, okay, I'm here now. And my life just isn't happening. It's not playing out the way that I thought it was going to play out. And so that's when that would be a turning point that led towards me kind of entering into the creative industry, which
Mm,
ultimately resulted, if you follow that narrative, it ultimately resulted in me creating my own agency.
yeah, I
So
love
that
it.
was like kind of the peak of that
Yeah,
that part of the story, which then had its ending.
right.
And
And then
then
another chapter is your creative life, which is a whole new chapter that you're still in that chapter now, right?
yeah, yeah. I would almost say there's I'm in a state of wondering in that I might be just at the beginning of a new chapter right now.
What is that?
Um, so I've been a coach now for 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
Um, and I plan to be a coach until as long as people would like to be coached by me.
Yeah.
Um,
Why not?
but I also like I'm just having an inkling, and this is where just most of these things have started for me in the past as a bit of a feeling. I'm just having a bit of a feeling that I am going to be manifesting something more physical. So
Mm,
my work right now is quite conceptual, right? It's
right.
an art of conversation. The outcomes of that are also conceptual. It's also, it's tangible for the person, but it's also intangible for me, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
witnessing, but there's no
You don't feel, you don't, yeah, you couldn't
there's
hold
no
it.
thing. There's no
Yeah.
thing. And I'm also witnessing at a distance, right? So I
Hmm.
think my inkling or the feeling is that there's going to be like something physical. Maybe if the way that I'm experiencing it right now is that it will be a physical space
Mm,
and that it will serve the community in some form.
I love it. It's almost like a circle almost, right? I wouldn't say a new chapter, but you're bringing back what you love the most, like the people, the community, the physical aspect, which is new to me. But I don't know, maybe not so much to you, but like bringing them together and creating the next art for your life.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my former partner of Pi, the agency that we started together, he and I reconnected earlier this year. Um, there was a real fallout when I left the agency, and when we reconnected, it was just like it felt so much in the right moment of time that we're connecting. Of course, the pandemic has urged us in a way to reconnect and sort of rebuild and reconcile things of the past. And so after that happened, he asked me towards the end of the conversation, he calls me Monk. He's like, "Hey, Monk, what do you think is the next thing?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, what's going to be your next thing?" I was like, "Next thing, I'm good with where I am." Like, I'm really good with what I have. It took me a minute to get here, and I feel confident in what I do. Like I have I'm so fortunate to have choices in who I work with. Like, why does there have to be a next thing? He's like, "But of course there's going to be a next thing for you." And it's almost as if that conversation was meant to be had,
Yeah,
that those words had to be said to me to just kind of open it up.
yeah,
Um, I left it. I didn't really go hard on that idea like I had to have an answer. It's almost like something is reaching out to me again
yeah,
very recently. And I think like maybe like much of my life was reaching out in a way,
yeah.
in that state of wondering, like, could it be this? Could it be that? And that really served me in let's call it like my early adult years. And now,
Mhm.
I'm in my 40s, and there could be a part of this, which is I have so much more knowingness with myself and alignment that I can listen.
Yeah,
And so, him saying that, I listened, and now I feel like I'm still listening, and I think that there is something there that is a next. I'm not in any hurry. I don't think that I feel zero urgency, which is very nice.
mm.
Um, but I'm definitely curious.
How do you explore your curiosity? How do you explore the wonder?
I mean, I think probably what happens, because it's been happening, is like the producer comes in.
The producer. Yeah.
Yeah, the producer
Yeah.
comes in. So I'm like, I'm so used to working with creatives for, it's like 12, 15 years of my life.
Yeah.
But now I'm also the creative. this is also a new revelation to me that, during the pandemic, this is the most creative time of my life, that I realized, oh, wait, I'm also the creative,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not just the backstage person, who you don't even know is there. My
Mm-hmm.
nickname was Ninja. But I'm like, actually, like, I'm the creator, like I'm I'm the artist or the director. And it's just like, okay, well, that feels good. And I don't relinquish the craft I have as a producer. I think like being a producer is really helpful. And
Mm,
so I think sometimes the wonder begins with something quite practical. Like
mm,
I let myself have wondering.
yeah.
Um, and then it's just the producer, if I were to take on her voice, she's just like, okay, so what's possible here?
Yeah.
Right. So, to go to this idea of this one day physical space that I've already named.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say where you are is a physical space that is so, so pretty.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it is. I mean, it would be wonderful it's a space like this, but I'm imagining that it's urban. I'm imagining actually that it's in Chinatown or the east part of the city, where I would call like the heart of culture still beats.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and that it's a building, and that it's downstairs is where you have this sort of community space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would love it to be completely 100% non-commercial.
Mm-hmm.
It would be kind of function as a hybrid between a community space and a gallery space,
Mm-hmm.
where my husband partner Yancy and I, we just both know people that are doing really interesting things, inspiring, um, groundbreaking, whatever you want to call it, and being able to bring that here, as well as learning about locally who's also doing that work, because I don't know.
Yeah.
So
You
it's
mean
also,
locally in Vancouver?
yeah. So it's also a way for me. This is like a channel for me to invite and know.
Yeah.
Um, and then I dream that in the back are offices where I'm actually coaching in the back.
Yeah.
Yancey's writing his book or whatever. And upstairs, my son Koji is doing his homework, or he's like, we live
Wow.
upstairs.
Yeah.
Um, so then your question of like, so what is the first thing you do, is I started to find out, well, what does a building cost? Like,
Mm.
if I want this to be non-commercial, if I don't want to rely on, oh, I got to sell something, I got to make you buy something to pay for this. If that's not what I want, I have to be able to like fund this whole thing,
Mm.
this building, partially. And then probably the second thing that I would do once I find out how much something like that costs, is to find out, well, if this is partially a community space, how can the city of Vancouver also support this in
Mm-hmm.
some kind of financial form,
Yeah.
and make this like truly a community space, where
Yeah.
it's also, maybe our family is kind of a caretaker of this
Mm-hmm.
space,
Mm-hmm.
and that one day we will move on from it and somebody else can be the caretaker of the space. So I start with a little bit about what's practical, right?
Yeah.
How much does it cost? Is this even like, should I continue dreaming about this, or
It's just
are
you're
the
grounded.
roadblocks too high, that it just seems like maybe I have to think about this in a slightly different way? And so
Wow.
what I have found out so far is like, oh, I can dream about this. This is not an insane dream. Um, so that's probably where I
What
get.
you said is it could almost become a business plan. Like what you said is very, very specific, and I can see the building in downtown Vancouver next to Chinatown. And what drawn you towards the community space?
I mean, it's kind of how things always work for me. It's what I need,
Yeah.
right? So, with Pi, with after what happened with Imagining Mozambique and Haiti, Love Haiti was the project, is just seeing that, oh, well, you can take all the things that you like about this job that you're doing in advertising, and you can put it in a context where it's actually having positive impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I was missing always was that positive impact, right? And so I thought,
Yeah.
okay, well, I have to create this agency that does that. And that's just how that's just a core tenet to what we do. And
Wow.
then with even with gelato, right? I was like really craving, I think I was really craving creating something. I think I was probably feeling a bit entrepreneurial in that point of my life. And I think it probably is a result of having done several things sort of on my own, right? I moved out to Italy on my own. I just done Japan on my own. So I think I was craving that. And now with this, with community, it keeps showing up for me whenever I'm thinking about, everything from what are going to be my focuses in 2021, even when I'm doing my sort of like weekly, you could call it weekly list or
Yeah.
priority. I'm also always sort of considering, how am I serving the us, not just what do I need to do this week, like
Yeah.
what's happening in the us space. And I always see this kind of like, I mean, obviously the pandemic has made it really hard to do that, but just like sort of this blank space where like there's nothing happening there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that just feels really, I mean, it's not that it feels wrong. It feels sad. It feels missing. It feels kind of lonely, if I'm totally honest now, right?
Yeah.
Living in Vancouver again for the first time in whatever 19 years, I don't have community. Right.
Yeah.
So
So
what,
you create one.
yeah, so I have to make one.
Yeah. And I think as an artist, right, when there's a blank canvas, you draw something, and perhaps this building to come. Do you have a name for it by any chance?
Oh yeah, it's going to be called Cozy Cozy.
Cozy Cozy. Okay, I love it. That's why I say it's very specific. Like when Cozy Cozy is like on Google Map or on any map, then yeah, it's. Do you have a timeline on when you plan to bring that to life?
Oh, wow, she's asking me for a timeline now.
I don't know. I mean, if it's really practical, then
I mean, it feels like a 2022 thing.
yeah,
As I mentioned to you before we began recording, is I'm moving. I'm gonna have to create a new house again, and I'm kind of I'm a home creator. I really care about my environment. And that takes energy. So I
yeah,
kind of have to take things one step at a time with that. So I think once I feel solid in my sense of home, then I can start to, press the gas a little bit harder.
I want to visit that place so bad. I was like, yes, earmarking someday 2022. I will reach out and where can I find this place? Where I will just Google it on my own. Have you ever read this book called The Art of Gathering by any chance?
By Priya.
Yeah.
I have it next to the bathtub as like the next book I'm gonna read.
Yeah. Because when you were talking about each gathering, the fundraiser, the event, the building, I was like, that book seems to be like perfect alignment with what you want to do next.
Maybe I should put that at the top of the list now that you said that.
I mean, I was just reading that on the plane yesterday, and it was really good. I was surprised by how good it was, especially the story, the details on how each gathering came about and fall out. And each of them is an art. So that's why.
Yeah, it really is an art. There's so much. I'm doing a group right now, first time women founders. We're a little bit over halfway through the experience. And, you can call these things group coaching or workshop, these really kind of, I think, boring corporate words that don't resonate with me whatsoever. So I really am intentional about calling it an experience. And even in the creation of it, I really just tried to think, I mean, I should step into this. I thought like an artist. I was about to say, I tried to think like an artist.
Yeah.
But I thought as an artist, what is the concept that I'm trying to communicate? Or what is the feeling that I hope when it's all over, people leave with? And that's where I began. I really tried to imagine if I could feel the feeling with them, what is the feeling, right? I'm the deliverer, so it's hard to have the exact feeling, but what is she walking away feeling? Then working backwards from that, what is happening potentially in this experience that might produce that feeling?
Yeah. Do you do that with every gathering you host, or is it more for the bigger ones?
I have done it more, let's say, proactively in the spaces where like there's a beginning and an end,
Yeah.
right? That could be a day experience. I did that with mothers a few weeks back on Mother's Day, where we had a half day together. So I started with that question first,
Yeah.
like, what is it that I hope she feels?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized when I was thinking about that is that I hope she found something that she didn't know she was missing.
Mm.
Right. And so how do you produce that feeling? Um, and so that's how the design of that experience came about. But when I'm doing, say, like my one-to-one coaching, I am sort of thinking about it in the conversation experience, right? Like
Mm.
what's the overall feeling I want to have in this conversation? And then through the arc of the experience, I have to discover that together with that person a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it's less of me being the director and more of me being a collaborator.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that sometimes I don't know how you feel, but like for me, one-to-one is way harder than group ones because
Mm,
you are the agenda is a bit lucid, right? You have a lot of things on your mind, but it's really up to that person to steer the wheel and you're just following through and guiding along the way.
yeah, and sometimes they come in with nothing, right? Sometimes they're just there. I kind of call it like a lump,
Yeah.
right? And you have to help mold that lump for that person because they might be just so under resourced that they just don't even know what they need in that moment.
Mm.
So yeah, there is I know what you mean by the hardness of that is challenging. I think that is sometimes also more the more fulfilling work I do is to be able to do that collaboratively with another person and for the to really witness that person also stepping into their power in this, it's a much more intimate space I find with
Mm.
one to one. And that's why I will never give up coaching. Like that's never going to leave my life,
Yeah.
because it really fulfills like on a certain type of connection that I really can't find in any other way.
Totally understood. And if anyone wants to work with you, do you what type of people do you love working with?
It's a hard question for me to answer. I mean, there's like an archetype, I guess, like an avatar client, right? If I picture my avatar client, she's a woman of color. I would say she has overcome explicit challenges and is still overcoming them.
Mm.
She is doing something that I believe truly matters.
Hmm.
Um, and, matter is quite broad.
Yeah.
Um, she has a depth of self awareness. She's done a level of her own work, but she understands that the work is never done.
Yeah.
She sees me as sort of her conciliary, right?
Yeah.
Like in The
Love
Godfather.
that. Yeah.
Like someone where she can go to with real practical stuff, like, oh my God, this is happening. But also sees me as a sister, right? Where she feels that level of safety and knowingness that I have her back,
Mm.
and that she can she can reach out to me when she needs.
Yeah.
Right? Whether that's not something I have to extract from her, she actually really understands that
Mm.
and is also respectful about that.
Yeah.
Um, and that she does not need to be, again, because I'm not a religious person, but like understands that there is more to the world than what we see and understand,
Mm.
and has a willingness to trust in some of that.
In some sense, I think trusting is something that I had to learn in the hard way, but trusting and letting go, surrendering, however people put it, has been the biggest force behind what I'm doing now. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's I call it thriving in chaos, but I don't know like how yeah, I couldn't imagine a life without it now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like it's maybe what I'm talking about here is when I think about her, and her could definitely be a him for sure. Um, like somebody who is really wanting to see a real paradigm shift
Mm.
in the world, and in and her humanness as well.
Yeah.
I think that that is maybe a sort of a core, like a core belief that makes that one-to-one relationship really, really rich and interesting and inventive and creative.
Yeah. And if listeners are them, how can I find you?
So I have a website, Third Awareness, third-awareness.com. I was not, I've never really been interested, even though I come from the world of marketing and advertising and communication, to commercialize who I am, you know, like pricing models and doing all that stuff. Like that is, especially when you're talking about an art of conversation or intimacy and authentic relationship, is just,
Yeah.
you know,
Priceless.
creating, yeah, and creating any kind of financial transaction in that is extremely important, but also sits incongruently for me sometimes, so that I've resisted being very online, let's say. But I created the Third Awareness recently because I felt a bit more expressive of how I see things as an art form.
Mm,
Um,
it's definitely linked in the bio, so people can just click it.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, and there you could just see if I'm going to be doing any upcoming group events, I'll post them there. I post it on Instagram. Yeah, I'm still kind of exploring how open I want to be, like how exposed I want this work to be, because just because it does feel really special to me, whether it's the one-to-one or the experiences. So when they come through people, which is mostly how people find me truly, I'm always surprised when someone like actually fills out a form, you know, or whatever, or just reaches out to me cold. I'm like, oh my God, how do you even know I exist? You know, that it just feels like kind of working in that place of trust, right? Of
Yeah.
there being something more than me. So I'm just sort of trusting what comes to me through the people that I build relationships with.
Yeah. Wow. I will definitely intro directly for all the folks that I know fit the profiles to send you more inbound requests. But if not, folks can just go to third-awareness.com, which is also linked in the bio to see what Jamie's up to.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any final words you want to leave with the audience? This is such a beautiful. I'm so, there's so many moments when I have goosebumps. So I know people share the feelings. We'll share the sentiments.
I know we've gone off script in many ways, but I really liked this question that I think you asked in the end of, you know, is there something that you would want to say or message out to a fellow, maybe I'm thinking about my fellow Asian American.
Yeah.
You know, it's like such a hard time recently for us. And something that's been very helpful for me, even before, let's say, the epidemic of hate started to hit the mainstream, is I've made like a very explicit action of drawing from my ancestors. So, okay, you know, I'm doing air quotes, hate me because I'm Asian, actually makes me want to be more Asian. Like I've noticed how much more I'm trying to speak Korean to my son. And I do a kind of a meditation where I'm actually dialoguing with my ancestors. I see them. I not only see, say, my grandparents or my great grandparents, I see all the descendants, or all of me. I am the descendant, all of the generations before me. And I'm explaining to them sort of what I do with my life.
Yes, I love doing that exercise. I sometimes do it to my future granddaughter and great granddaughter as well as like the ancestors. But that just put things in perspective. You know, that is such a, I don't know, it let me see myself in a way that I couldn't do it in my day-to-day, very laser focused mindset.
Yeah. Well, and I find it really helpful, specifically in this moment of time too, which is to say, whatever it is that you want to manifest now, like actually, and this is what happens in my meditation, they bow to me at the end. They are supporting me, and all of their sacrifices and, you know, everything that they have done so that I can exist is supporting me to go forward. And
Wow.
so if I think about my Asian American brothers and sisters, is just to say we come from such tremendous people. And I think we need to come into more connection with that. If that's through, a meditation act, if that's through, dialoguing with your parents and your grandparents, like we can draw from their energy and become more resilient through this moment in time, and maybe even more than resilient, we can thrive, because I think that
Yeah.
that's actually what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Connection, dialogue, having that tapping into the energy and wisdom of ancestors and thrive, right? Wow. This is such a knowledge drop at the end. But thank you so much for sharing your time, the space, holding the space with us, Jamie. I'm going to put all the links in the bio. Folks can find out more. And I'm so grateful for this conversation.
Oh, me as well. Thank you so much for reaching out, and I just really love your joyful energy. It's so wonderful, and the world is lucky to have more of your energy.
Thank you. I will wisely allocate that. I wouldn't like to store it that way.
The producer in me says yes. Very good.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.